much for joining me on Being Indispensable. My name's Liz Van Vliet. We're all dispensable. I know that better than anyone. I'm a breast cancer survivor. But that doesn't mean that we can't invest in ourselves to improve the skills and capabilities that are going to help us stand out and be perceived as indispensable. Being indispensable is also about the being side of the equation. Because if we're not looking after ourselves and our own well-being, then we have no hope of showing up as indispensable in the workplace. Well, hello, my lovely listener. It's Liz here, and I am losing track a little bit of where I'm up to in terms of episode numbers, because I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've stopped putting them in the title of the episode. But according to my records, this is episode 194. So let's just accept that I may be one off. I might actually be 195, but I'm going to say I'm 194. Anyway, it's lovely to be back with you. 2 weeks. I'm doing episodes every 2 weeks, so I hope you are happy to have me drop into your feed with my second episode for the month of February. What is this week's episode all about? Well, as you can guess it from the title, I would imagine, it's all about helping you ask questions. Not just ask questions, but ask better questions. And of course, if you haven't worked it out, it's a solo episode, because I am really enjoying doing these solo episodes so that I can share over particularly this first half of the year, when I have changed up the way I'm delivering my content, that every month is a different focus area. It's a different one of my impact and insight zones. And February, if you've not listened to my first episode in February or seen my posts on LinkedIn or elsewhere, February is all about that impact and insight zone in my linchpin model of your leader, your executive, your boss, your manager, whatever you prefer to call them. So this episode, the second for this month, around this area of really managing up, is another way to think about it. I want to focus on questioning. So questioning enables us to organise our thinking around what we don't know. That is a quote that I found. I don't have a source for it, but I bloody love it. Questioning enables us to organise our thinking around what we don't know. But, and here's the big but, what gets in the way of us asking questions as an assistant, as an EA, PA, office manager, receptionist, whatever your admin professional title is? So which of the following resonates with you when it comes to what gets in the way of you asking questions? Is it the fear of looking incompetent, like you don't know your job, or that you haven't been paying attention? Or is it the fear of being a bother, being annoying to colleagues, or in this case, in this context, being annoying to your executive, to your manager? Now, the reality is that we actually grow up asking questions without fear. Like any of us that have got children will have gone through that phase with our toddler of so many questions that exhaust you as a parent. And if you're a teacher dealing with littlies, I'm sure that's also something you deal with. But what actually happens is that as we go through the education process, we can actually find ourselves associating asking questions with judgment, with it's about being right or wrong. Because what the reality is that we're assessed throughout our schooling by our answers to questions, and to compound it, we can be the type of child or student that can actually be given feedback that it's actually we're asking too many questions. So I watched a YouTube clip on this topic, and one of the guests, I'll put the link in the show notes, of course, one of the guests mentioned research in the US that found that a 4-year-old girl is asking as much as 300 questions a day. And yet when that child and children like her go into school, we see a steady decline that happens as they go through the education system, to the point where questioning in schools by what in the US is termed junior high is almost at zero. Studies have also shown that this means that as we enter the workforce, we can tend to view questions as risky propositions. I've got a daughter that's, my middle daughter, that's going through the application process for graduate programs. And of course, when we're in an interview, we always get that question, do you have any questions for me? How many times have we sat there? Are we guilty of saying, no, I've done a lot of research. I think I'm okay. You've answered all my questions in this interview. Questions are risky propositions. So another article that I read in Harvard Business Review described asking good questions, or asking questions in general, as a, quote, lost art. So if you feel any fear around asking questions, or you have a story in your head about what your manager is going to be thinking of you when you ask questions, reassure yourself. Take a deep breath. You are not alone. It is very common. But I'm here to help you reconnect with that child in you. I describe being a curious cat. I want you to get in touch with that inner curious cat. I want you to get in touch with that little child who felt okay about asking questions, who didn't judge themselves about needing or wanting to ask questions. I want you to get more comfortable with asking questions. And in this episode, I want to equip you, of course, with some ideas about how you can go about this in your role. Now, if you've listened to the podcast for a while or been in my training, I love a good quote from one of these old Greek blokes, these old philosophers. So Plato apparently said, the right question is usually more important than the right answer. So let that land with you. The right question is usually more important than the right answer. Now, let's also think about the WIFM, the what's in it for you, by asking questions, by improving and embracing the idea of asking questions and elevating your ability to ask questions. Questioning skills help you increase your understanding. They help you get unstuck and they unlock new knowledge. And as I said, leader zone is all about one of these 5 impact and insight zones that I focus on in my linchpin assistant model. And as I've said, February is all about me sharing practical and tactical tips in this zone. Now, I've explored the topic of asking questions in so many of my podcast episodes in different contexts. But one that I'm going to put a link to in the show notes is episode 48, How to Interview Your Boss to Clarify Expectations and Perceptions. That was released way back in 2017. That just goes to show how I really am the OG. I know it stands for original girl or original whatever, but I just think of it as the old girl. I'm the old girl when it comes to podcasts for assistants. So 2017, people, that's how long I've been doing it since before then. That was episode 48. So the link will be in the show notes. And just a heads up, I've changed my CRM in the days since 2017. So the link that you might find in that episode actually doesn't work right now. And that will be something I'm fixing this week. Anyway, moving on. Today, I want to remind you of a few key ways to ask questions, because repetition of these concepts, you might have heard me bang on about this before, but repetition increases insight. So I'm going to repeat myself around a few things, but I'm also going to share some new ideas with you. So first thing that I'm going to reinforce, because I've repeated and I talk about this in my training, when it comes to asking questions, open-ended questions are your best friend. They are your friend. Yes, there's a place for closed questions, questions that can be answered with a yes or no, but open-ended questions are your friend. Now, if you're sitting here going, what is an open-ended question? It is a question that starts with a W or an H. So we've got our who, what, where, why, when, and how. So first tip is increase the number of open questions you ask. So if you thought about a meeting you're going into with your manager and you've written down your questions, look at them. Are they open-ended questions? Turn them into an open-ended question. My second thing that I want you to think about is what your end goal is when it comes to crafting your questions. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me explain. There are actually 4 different types of questions that you can ask someone, including your boss. And this is a concept that I read about in a Harvard Business Review article. Let me talk you through them. So there are elevating questions, there are funneling questions, there are adjoining questions, and there are clarifying questions. At a high level, elevating questions are your zoom out questions. Funneling questions are your zoom in questions. Adjoining questions are the connect the dots questions. They tend to be quite, we'll talk about this. And clarifying questions are all about shared understanding. So let me go through what they talk about in this Harvard Business Review article written by a guy called Tom Pohlman and Neethi Mary Thomas, who I've probably just butchered her name. Anyway, let's start with elevating questions. So elevating questions are the zoom out questions. They are the questions that raise broader issues and highlight the bigger picture. So it's the idea that you don't want to be too immersed in an immediate problem or an immediate task that makes it harder to see the overall context behind it. And you know, if you've listened to me before, I'm all about understanding the context. So it's the idea of taking a step back. What is the bigger issue? So it's, you know, that is where your what question, what are we trying to achieve, or what is it that would make this a success for you, is a classic elevating question. What is the outcome you're looking for from having this event is an elevating question. Then we have a funneling question, and they're the zoom in questions. So they're the ones where you dive deeper. And they're the ones that help you understand how something has, how someone has arrived at a conclusion. They're the ones that can actually assist you as your partner to your executive in helping challenge assumptions and to help them understand the bigger picture. So they are the very analytical questions. So why is this something that is important? Why is this something that is a top priority to you? Would be a funneling question. Why is the due date on this sooner than XYZ? That is a funneling question. Then we have adjoining questions, which are the connect the dot questions. And they are the ones that really are your how questions and, again, your what questions in terms of open-ended. They're the ones that are used to explore what Harvard Business Review describes as the related aspects of the problem, for example, that might be ignored in the conversation. So, for example, an adjoining question that you might, have the opportunity to ask in your world might be, how will we get, insert the name of the person or the team, on board with this project or this task or this activity? That's an adjoining question. And then the final type of question is what's called a clarifying question. And I am a big lover of the clarifying question for you as an assistant. So they're the ones that help you better understand what's been said. So in so many conversations, you have information coming at you. I'm all about you being an active listener, and part of active listening is this idea of asking clarifying questions. So that's where my TED for the win, tell me, explain for me, describe for me, are great ways of asking clarifying open questions. So I want you to just think for a moment for you about the type of question you are currently asking or you're most comfortable asking. So think about that. Pause if you want to. But in terms of elevating questions, because I've talked in past podcasts about TED for the win and, the idea of clarifying questions and the and what else idea to make sure that you're getting all the information. But some examples of elevating questions, and I want you to notice the word that they start with. Here's 4 examples of elevating questions that you can ask your exec. What is one thing I could do to make your job less stressful this week? That's an elevating question. Another one. What is one thing I do that frustrates you? That's an elevating question. Might be a challenging elevating question. Number 3, what is in your eyes my greatest strength? That's an elevating question. And finally, what is a task or project that you are holding on to that I could take off your hands in part or in full? And yes, I know you will be rolling your eyes saying, Liz, that question is just going to give me more to do, but that opens another door for another what question when you get given that delegation is, that's great. I'm so pumped. I'm so excited. Now, what would you like me to take off my priorities so that I can focus on that? So all 4 of these types of questions have a place in deepening your insight and elevating your impact when it comes to your leader, when it comes to your executive. Now, just some final tips that I want to leave you with. First off, I've talked about all of these open-ended questions. When you're using open-ended questions, there is room for closed questions as well. So combining open-ended with closed questions. So asking a what or a how, then clarifying, and then using a closed question that sounds something like, so if I've understood you correctly, what you're telling me is X, or what you're telling me you need is Y. Your closed question is, have I understood that correctly? Have I got that right? Closed question, yes or no. My next tip that I want to reinforce is don't forget to make room for silence. Silence is golden. And you know, if you've listened to the podcast for a long time, you know that I bang on about that. Ask a question and then stop talking. Let people think about, percolate your question. Don't just ask the next question or ramble on. Make room for them to process your question and respond. And just finally, as I've said, remember to use your active listening. And a key part of active listening is this idea of mirroring back what you've heard and understood. Now, I want to finish this podcast episode with a final tip because I'm circling back to the fear that we have. Because my final tip is for you to reframe the way you think about asking questions. So when we think about what stops us from asking questions, if it's fearing that you should already know the answer, I want you to reframe that fear into something, a positive thought. Asking that question shows that I'm interested in learning is a way of reframing that. Or if your fear is that your question will be a bother or a hindrance or will come across as awkward, reframe that into asking questions leads to better outcomes. Questioning is a skill worth investing in. It helps you uncover new insights. It helps you elevate your impact. It also demonstrates vulnerability and curiosity. And it improves our emotional intelligence. And those, as you know, are power skills that I also bang on about. So, I hope this has been a helpful episode for you in this month of increasing and improving your insight and impact in terms of your leader. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see the show notes, head over to my website. It would be great if you haven't already done so. If you enjoyed the show, if you could kindly go to iTunes and leave a review. It helps other people find the show. Thanks for listening and have a great week.